thank you very much for joining us this morning, everybody. I know it's quite early in Argentina, so thank you for making the effort to come. So we're going to be talking today about how we can help our young primary level students start to read for implicit meaning and for inference. And as we know, this is an important skill that students are going to need once they come to their IGCSE years and their IGCSE exam. And it's something we can be helping students with from a very early age. Just great. So we all actually use clues for inference every day of our lives. So to start with, for this little warm-up, I'd like you to use the chat box to tell me what else we might put in these empty blue boxes. How do we know if our friend is in a good mood or not? How do we know that? What clues can we pick up from our friend? I filled in one. What he or she says is one of the clues. What are the other clues that we get from our friends to know if they're in a good mood or not? Use the chat box to give me some ideas. So yes, body language, gestures, what a person shows in their face. Yes, if they're smiling or if they're frowning. Anything else? Okay, great. You've their reactions. I think you've pretty much got it. So we put in, you know, body language and gestures, facial expressions, and also the tone of voice. So not just what somebody says, but how they say it. Are they saying it in a very bright, upbeat way, or are they saying it in a more downbeat way, expressing that they're really fed up today? So we can tell a lot from people about how people are feeling without actually having to ask them a direct question. So we're picking up on implicit meaning when we're doing that. And when we're reading for inference, we know that to infer is to make an informed guess. If your dad's car is in the driveway, you might come to the conclusion that your dad is at home. And this is an important learning objective for students working in Cambridge schools. It's an explicit learning objective for stages 3 to 6 in primary. And it's essentially about picking up the clues the writer is giving us in the text. So we need students to be reading with real attention to detail, to be able to understand the reasoning behind an author's choice of vocabulary, and to pick up on the connotations and the associations implicit in that language. We're going to be unpacking that during the webinar today. We need to go beyond the actual words and think about why the author has chosen them and what their connotations are. Okay, let's look at another example. Here's the first poll. I want you to look at this picture. Are we supposed to be frightened when we see a picture of a bear like this? If we were to see this bear, would we be frightened? Yes or no? So Kim, can we launch this poll, please? Are we frightened when we see a bear like this?
That should come up on your screen now.
Yeah, brilliant.
Great, we've got people up.
So please vote. There's no right answer. I'm just interested in what everybody thinks. There's this picture of a big scary bear. Are we going to be frightened? Yes, that's absolutely right. We are supposed to be frightened. We would be frightened if we met a bear like this. Now I want you to read this. Are we supposed to be frightened? Is the reader supposed to be frightened of this bear? There is a bear, he insisted. I distinctly saw it. It was wearing a funny kind of hat. Are we supposed to be frightened of this bear? Anybody voting?
Yeah, we've got most of the votes in there. I think it's a pretty solid answer, so I'll share those now.
Brilliant, absolutely. No, we're not supposed to be frightened of this bear. But what we need to be doing is we need to be helping our students understand how a sentence like this conveys that we are not supposed to be frightened of the bear. That's implicit meaning. That's implied. It's something we have to infer from this sentence, that no, we're not supposed to be frightened. So we want to give students strategies to help them work the meaning out. This is a very simple example. Does anybody know where this is from? Anybody want to say in the chat box where we know where this is from? In the chat box? Kim or David, any ideas? It's Paddington. It's from A Bear Called Paddington by Michael Bond. So what we want to help our students do is to break the process down. What is it in this piece of writing that carries the implied meaning that this is not a scary bear that we should be frightened of? That's what we're going to be working on. What words do you think it is? Use the chat box to tell me what it is that tells us this bear isn't frightening. Let me have a look. What have we got? Funny. Yeah. Funny kind of hat. What's the other key word? What's the other key word? It's not just funny or funny kind of hat. It's that the bear was wearing a funny kind of hat. That's upsetting our expectations. We don't expect bears that are wild animals to wear anything, and he's wearing a funny kind of hat. Great, thank you. So what we want to help our students do is to identify the clue word, think about what they make us think of, think about why the writer might have used them. In some cases, think about similar or alternative words. And following this structure, following this strategy, will help students work out what an implied meaning is and answer comprehension questions about implied meaning and inference. So the first thing we need to be helping our students with is with developing their vocabulary skills. So I know you already do this. I'm sure you all do this a lot, but we cannot underestimate the importance of looking at vocabulary in reading texts. This example is from International Primary English Stage 3. And you can see this is a fairly simple piece of reading text about a leopard that has escaped and that has been attacking people. But you can see that the author has used a lot of very interesting and rich vocabulary that carry words that carry connotations. So the author has deliberately used the word prowl instead of walk to describe how the cat is moving. Deliberately using the word crouch instead of bending down because it's much more evocative and visual. Deliberately used the word pool to describe the light. So making an association between light and water, deliberately using a more evocative word than a word like spot or patch. Using the word moonlight rather than light, tense rather than nervous, and spring rather than jump. So we want to be helping students to learn these words, but also to learn the value of them and how they go beyond their meaning and what they think about, what they imply and what their associations are. Here's another example. And obviously course books can provide some activities. So this is another piece of text. We don't need to read this, but this is about a rescue, about a young boy who slips over a cliff and has to be rescued by helicopter. And you can see that the course is asking us to think about the vocabulary. So if we read the first question, there was a hum and a whir in the air. And we say the words hum and whir make the sentence interesting. The writer could have just said noise, but the writer, Alan Durrant, has deliberately chosen to use interesting vocabulary. Look at exercise number 2. Which are the interesting words in these sentences? Which are the words that show the author has really thought about what he's writing? What's the interesting word in the first sentence? Use the chat box to tell me which word you think is interesting there. Inched, absolutely. What about the second sentence? What's the interesting word there? The author's used inched rather than moved because it gives a sense of creeping along, piece by piece, bit by bit, small amounts. What's the interesting word in the second sentence? Spinning, absolutely. What about the third sentence? Amazing, absolutely. So you can see that we've built some activities around thinking about, identifying and thinking about what the interesting words are. And then you can see that there's a more creative activity where we ask students to replace words. Let's do number 3A. What word might we replace moved by? And we're giving students some choices here. Waved, absolutely. So by doing simple exercises like this, we're starting to build up a student's understanding of words that occupy a similar semantic space, but that have different connotations, or that may be more interesting, that may make our writing more interesting, that may carry extra implication. Okay. So I'd like you to read this short piece of text and answer the question. Is Jude pleased with the chocolates? But let's give everybody a couple of minutes, Kim, before we put the question, the poll up. So just skim read. Use your skim reading skills to skim read this and answer the question. Is Jude pleased with the chocolates? You'll notice that the author doesn't say explicitly whether Jude is pleased or not. We have to read and imply and work that out. Okay, shall we put the poll up now?
Should come up for you guys now.
Are we getting some answers, Kim?
Yeah, we've got 3 answered so far. So if anybody hasn't voted yet, please do. I'll leave it another few seconds. Everybody's answered yes so far.
Great, brilliant. That's great. That is definitely the correct answer. But this is a question, a comprehension question, where students have to demonstrate they can read for inference. So you've all done that naturally, which is great. That's absolutely true. Jude is absolutely delighted to have some chocolates. But the key thing is, how do we know that? What is it in the text, in the last 2 paragraphs? I'll give you a clue. Which sentences carry the implied meaning that Jude is very pleased with the chocolates? You only need to be looking at the last 2 paragraphs. Which 2 sentences might we pick out as carrying the answer, as carrying the implied meaning that yes, Jude is really pleased with these chocolates? Let's see what we've got. Jude's eyes widened to saucers. Yes, excellent. That's number 1. And what would be number 2? Jude rushed upstairs, clutching her booty to her chest. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yes, I saw Jude's eyes widen to saucers and she rushed upstairs, clutching her booty to her chest. Now, some of our students might struggle to understand how those sentences tell us that Jude is really excited with her chocolates. So we can give them a strategy that allows them to break things down step by step. And at Collins, we're very keen on helping students learn how to learn. One of the things we think is really important is getting each individual student to understand their own metacognitive skills, which is just a fancy way of saying to help each student understand how they learn, where their difficult points are, and then giving them strategies to help them improve their learning based on understanding how they learn. So David knows this. I know the first 5 numbers in Bahasa Indonesia because I understand. I learned them really quickly in the space of a couple of minutes when we were in Jakarta a couple of years ago. I'm able to tap into how I learn to learn that. So we want to give students strategies for learning to read for implied meaning. So the first thing we have to do is to help them understand the interesting words, which in this case is widened to saucers. Then we get them to think about, what does that make me think of? Why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because saucers are big and round. Why has the author used these words? Well, because when we open our eyes, when we're excited, we open our eyes really wide. So the author is using these words to say, Jude is very excited about the chocolates. So we encourage students to break it down step by step using a chart a little bit like this, or using a mind map, putting it in circles and drawing arrows between them. Let's do the next sentence. Rushed, clutching to her chest and her booty. So rushed is an important choice on the part of the author, because if we rush somewhere, yes, we go very quickly, but we're also going without thinking, and we're often going with excitement. So we want our students to understand that rush is a really important word because it means not only run, it means run with excitement. We want students to understand that clutch means hold something really tightly, as if we never want to let it go. And then we want students to understand that we use the word booty to describe anything that is valuable. So by decoding these words step by step, we can come to the conclusion that yes, Jude is really pleased to have the chocolates and answer the question. Let's have a look at another example. So read this sentence and we're going to answer the questions in black first. All of the questions in black are fairly literal. The answers are fairly explicit in the text. I'll give you a minute to read through. So use the chat box to tell me what the name of the teacher is. What's the name of the teacher in this bit of text? This bit of Charles Dickens, this bit of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. What's the teacher's name? Mr. Creakle. Great. Where is the story set? Where's the story set? In a school, absolutely. And when in the day does this event take place? When in the day? At what time of day approximately does this event take place? In the morning, after breakfast. Yeah, Absolutely. But you can see that to answer the question, what emotion are the boys feeling at the end of the passage, we don't have any explicit information on that. We're going to have to decode the clues that Charles Dickens has given us. And in this case, he's giving us lots of clues, lots of small clues to build up the picture. In the previous example with Jude and her chocolates, we had a couple of sentences that were very, very clear in implying that she was absolutely delighted to receive the chocolates. But here we have to give a little more thought, read with a little more care. Can you use the chat box to give me what you think some of the clue words are that Charles Dickens is giving us? And there are quite a lot here contributing clues to the answer to the question. So again, use the chat box just to jot in your ideas. What do you think the clue words are here? The roar of voices. Yeah. Hushed as death. Boys were struck speechless and motionless. Anything else? Anything else that you might say to students? Look at this. This is contributing to how the boys are feeling. Giant, that's a good word. Anything else? Yep, giant's great. There's one other word in there, I think, that's quite interesting. Surveying is a good word. Captives, absolutely. Captives is a very strong word that Dickens has chosen to use here. He's not used the word prisoner. He's not used the word criminal. He's used the word captives. That's a very powerful word. Okay, great. So let's work through these step by step using the chart that I've given you. So the first set of clue words, roar of voices. So we want students to associate roar with the fact that lions, bears, big, large, scary wild animals roar. So he's really making a point about how loud the children are being. He's setting up how loud the children are before Mr. Creakle enters the room with how they react when he enters. So Dickens is wanting to tell us that the children are being really, really noisy, like wild animals. Then when Mr. Creakle enters, suddenly they become hushed as death. And hush is an important word because it implies more than silent. If we say the children are quiet, all we're saying is that the children are not saying anything. They're not making any noise. If we say the children become hushed, we're also suggesting that the children are not moving. That not only are they quiet, but they're not making any movement at all. And hushed as death, of course, suggests that also suggests the children are completely still and that they're nervous and frightened. A giant is huge and scary. A giant dominates. So by saying that Mr. Creakle is like a giant, by using that simile, we are suggesting that Creakle is completely dominant and frightens the children. And the word captives tells us that the children have no freedom. It's as if they've been caught and locked up. It's more than prisoner. It's got a sense that they've been captured. They're not criminals. Their freedom has been taken away from them. So all of these words contribute to the sense of what the boys are feeling and how they're reacting. And then we've also got another couple of clues in cry out that tells us that Tungay, who's Creakle's bodyguard or enforcer, has a very loud voice and is speaking louder than he needs to. And ferociously makes us think that Tungay is very scary, like a wild animal. So we have to put the clues that all of these words give us together along with this last one, yeah, the boys were struck. Now, when we strike something, we hit it. So the boys are not just speechless and motionless. It's as if they've been hit, and being struck has made them speechless and motionless. So it's immediate, and it's as if they've been hit by treacle and tongue. So all of these reinforce what the boys are going to be feeling and the emotion that the boys will be feeling at the end of that passage. And all of these words contribute to helping us answer the question in blue. What emotion are the boys feeling at the end of this passage? We have to put all of this information together to answer this. So let's have a look at what we think.
That poll's up on your screens now, just to give your answers, guys. Got 100% fear so far. So I'll just end that now. You can see the answers.
Yeah, great, absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yes, they're frightened. They're really, really frightened. When I did this webinar to teachers in another country, we had 50% fear and 50% nervousness. But it is absolute fear and terror that the boys are feeling. And I think it's very clear from the clues that Dickens gives us. Okay. So what we're wanting students to do is to have a good, strong vocabulary, an understanding of how words occupy a similar space but have a slightly different meaning or slightly different connotation, and to be able to then, if they find reading for implied meaning or reading for inference difficult, to have strategies like the chart strategy we've looked at, to be able to start to decode and set out step by step how they get from the question, how they get to the answer of the question using the clue words that the authors have provided. So of course a lot of this hinges on the initial work that you as the teacher are doing in the classroom with the vocabulary, and these are some examples here. So of some text looking at powerful verbs. So instead of using walk, the author might use stride to describe how the teacher enters the classroom. And the little section on adjectives here that we've given as an example looks at the difference between mild, warm, and scorching. Mild and warm are both less strong than hot, and scorching is even stronger than hot. And I'm sure that you all use word books, and indeed publishers, everybody who writes textbooks says, get children to write down new words and interesting words in their workbook. But I would suggest it's more than just writing the words down. You need to help students make a note of the connotation or the implication or the association. And that may be visual. So you might say, we'll write down mild, warm, hot, and scorching, and we'll give them stars to say how hot they are. So mild is the coolest, warm is a bit hotter than mild, hot is hotter than warm, and scorching is hottest of the lot. So we might give them stars. We might also color code them. There's nothing wrong with using some color or drawing some images, so that as well as having a list of these 4 synonyms in their workbook, we're helping students understand the connotations and the associations of which is the stronger. And of course, this isn't just for reading skills and answering comprehension questions, but it's also good when it comes to them writing creatively themselves, that they have a better way and a more interesting way of describing things. got another example here. This is a short poem from our Stage 3 book. Teacher said, you can use mumbled and muttered, groaned, grumbled and uttered, professed, droned or stuttered, but don't use said. You can use rant or recite, yell, yodel or snort, bellow, murmur or moan. You can use grunt or just groan, but don't use said. You can use hum, howl and haul, scream, screech, shriek or bawl, squeak, snivel or squeal, with a blood-curdling wail, but don't use said, said my teacher. So you can see in this box, we have the words mumble, stutter, snort, murmur, squeal, snivel, grunt, mutter. Now these are great. These are all synonyms in one way or another for the word said, but they all carry different connotations. Use the chat box to tell me which words are associated with the noises animals make. 3 of these words can be used to describe human beings speaking, but 3 of them also have connotations of associations with animals. Which 3 are those? Can you use your chat box to tell me which 3 they are? Grunt, squeal, and snort. Absolutely, brilliant. Which 3 carry connotations of speaking quietly? Murmur. Yep. Mutter and mumble. And which one carries connotations of speaking nervously? Stutter. Absolutely. So these are, we want children to be doing more than just learning these words. We want them to be learning these connotations and associations and helping them harness their own metacognitive skills to remember these words. That could be an alphabetical list with an example sentence. It could be something much more visual, something like a mind map, as I've done here for said. So you can see I've grouped the ones that are associated with quietly all to one side. Mumble, as well as meaning speak quietly, also implies not speaking clearly. Murmur really just means speaking softly. And as students read, and they read books and they read stories like the prowling of the leopard earlier on and the pooling of the water, they'll start to realize that murmur is associated with the noise that water makes. Mutter is possibly louder than murmur or mumble and might be a bit reluctant. So we can use mind maps as well as a whole range of visual things to help students harness their own metacognitive skills for learning vocabulary. And then when they read Elaine mumbled the words, and Kim then says, was Elaine speaking enthusiastically? They'll understand no, because mumble doesn't imply enthusiasm. Mumble implies speaking quietly, possibly speaking reluctantly. So they'll be able to understand or be able to learn to start to understand implicit meaning. And we can give students lots of nice activities to do with thesauruses. I don't know if you ever use thesauruses in the classroom, but this is a small activity on the word nice, which is one of those words everybody overuses because it's such an easy word. It's used in so many places. We all know what it means. But to help students really actively learn vocabulary, we can get them to do exercises. This is an example page from our primary thesaurus. You have to be careful with thesauruses. Don't use online thesauruses with young children because it just lists synonyms without breaking them down by connotation or area or topic or theme. You can see here all of the words for nice are broken down by area. So we have synonyms, what you might use when you're talking about people, what you might use when you're talking about food or a meal, what you'd use if you were talking about the weather or an event or a view or clothes. So we want students to be using this kind of material and then doing this kind of exercise. So they're starting to build up their vocabulary and their understanding of connotation and usage. I've just put them into a chart there, but again, another student might benefit from mapping them out in a mind map and maybe drawing pictures to help them remember. How are we doing for time? We've got another couple of minutes. So what would you say if you were doing an activity around interesting vocabulary? What would you give me instead of the words that are here in red? The storm in the desert was very bad. The sand was thrown up in the air and got into our ears, eyes and mouths. The wind made a loud noise and it was very hard to walk. How would we make that more interesting? Give me some ideas using the chat box for some of the words that you might use instead of the words in red there. No ideas? The wind roared. Lovely. Great. Okay, let's look at some of the options that I've included. So the storm in the desert was appalling, atrocious, abysmal, dreadful, horrendous. The sand was hurled up, tossed up, chucked up. The sand penetrated, pierced, entered. The wind roared, was tumultuous, deafening, thunderous, thundered, boomed. And walking was difficult, taxing, arduous, strenuous. So we want students to be thinking about activities and exercises like this to really broaden their vocabulary. You'll see that I've highlighted 2 for the wind made a loud noise. What's the difference between tumultuous in yellow and thunderous and thundered in pink? What do you think the difference is? Does anyone have any ideas? You can put them into the chat box again if you have any ideas. Thunderous and thundering, thundered, obviously are associated with storms. So where we get lightning and thunder. So the emphasis with thundering and thunderous is very much on the sound, the noise itself. If we describe something as tumultuous, as well as suggesting noise, it also suggests a lot of energy and a lot of activity and a lot of rushing around. So there's a very subtle difference there. If we said the wind was tumultuous, not only is it making a lot of noise, but it's also changing direction and swirling around and is being very active, very energetic and confusing us a lot. But if we say the wind thundered, we're really just thinking about the sound rather than about the energy and the activity of the wind. So we want to do a lot of work on vocabulary with our students to help them understand what constitutes an interesting word, to help them think about why an author has chosen to use prowl instead of walk, or why an author has chosen to use mumble instead of said, or why an author has chosen to use a phrase like struck speechless rather than stopped talking. Then we want students to really think critically about what these words mean. Prowl carries associations of how animals, particularly cats, move. Mumble carries associations of perhaps not speaking very clearly. Snort carries associations of how animals might blow down their noses and make noises at us. What do these words make us think of? Why has the writer used them? Are there any similar words we can think of that help us So we want to be thinking about interesting words, thinking about their connotations, and thinking about why the author has used them for clues to the implied or the inferred meaning. Let's finish off with another couple of fairly simple activities. Since Rose's arrival, the family had heard an awful lot about Rose's multi-talented twins. Is the family interested in Rose's stories about the twins? No, yes, not particularly, or quite interested. What would you say? Please vote. You should see the poll. Do we have any answers, Kim?
Yes, we do. So I'll end that there. We've got no and not particularly.
Absolutely. That's fine. I think both are fine answers and both are accurate. The words "an awful lot" are negative. They tell us that the family are not really interested in Rose's twins. What about this? It's the same question. Since Rose's arrival, the family had heard incredible tales about Rose's multi-talented twins. Are the family interested? What do we think? It's the same question. Yes, exactly. They're quite interested. They're more interested. So just subtle changes in wording, the difference between an awful lot and incredible tales changes how the family feel, changes what the author is telling us about how the family feels, and changes the answer to a question about implied meaning and inference. So it's really important to read text and to encourage students to read text with real attention to detail. Last one, read this poem and then tell me who fell asleep in class. Let's give everybody a minute or two, Kim, to read the poem. I fell asleep in class today as I was awfully bored. I laid my head upon the desk and closed my eyes and snored. Okay, let's put the poll up now. So the poet doesn't tell us. We have to read with real attention to detail to be able to work out what he's implying about who fell asleep. What would you say? Have we got any answers, Kim?
Yeah,
absolutely. That's great. That's fabulous. You've all got it right. The teacher. Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And the bit that tells us is the last bit. I slept through class and probably I would have slept some more, except my students woke me as they headed out the door. So when I've done this poem before, I have in a completely different place with a completely different set of teachers. A lot of them say the students fell asleep. And we have to go back and say, no, the clue is my students woke me. Who has students? Who would describe students as being mine? It's the teacher. So the implication is it's the teacher who fell asleep in class today. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? It's quite difficult, but what I've tried to do is to give you an idea for those students who struggle to read for inference. Perhaps their English isn't very strong, or perhaps their brains are not wired that way, because let's be honest, everybody's brain is wired differently. To help to start to give them strategies to answer comprehension questions where they have to read for an implied meaning. Do let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Use the Q&A box.
Getting loads of thanks in the chat box there, Elaine. Even if there aren't any questions, just to say thank you as well to the teachers. You've all been really interactive. It's been a really great webinar for you guys, getting involved with all the polls as well. We've put the certificate of attendance into the chat box for you there. And just to say again that we are recording this, so we can send this on afterwards as well to you, so you've got that saved. And I think we can leave it there then if there's no questions.
I did have one other thing. I'd prepared 4 more slides in case somebody said, what do we do with younger students?
Yeah, why not?
If anybody's interested in how do you start to read for implied meaning with students who are in stages 1, 2, and 3, I've got some slides prepared to answer that question. Shall I run through those, Kim, as we have a couple of minutes?
Yes, we're getting yeses for sure. So in the chat, please do.
So with younger students, we can start to help them develop the skills by using the illustrations in the reading books that we're giving them. And I know a lot of people will do picture reading, but it's about a little bit more than just looking at the picture. So we're looking at this picture. This is an example from Colin's Big Cat, A Day Out, which is a red A book, so it's pretty early. So this is about a chap who goes out for a walk, and he goes into the wood. Now you might say to the children, what colour is the bear? So everybody tell me what colour the bear is in the chat box. Yeah, the bear's brown. So we can explicitly see that the bear is brown in the chat box. Why does the bear look happy? Why does the bear look interested in the hiker? Or what does that white line represent? So we've looked at the colour of the bear, which is an obvious, very explicit thing. Now we say to the child, why is that bear looking happy? Why is there a smile on his face? Why does he look interested? Why is he hiding behind the tree? What's that funny white line showing us? It's showing us that there must be something that smells very good in the hiker's backpack. So perhaps it's something to eat. So we want to be talking to children about what's going on in this picture, not just looking at the words, but talking about what's going on in that picture. There's something in that rucksack that smells attractive to that bear. Perhaps it's food, because bears can be greedy. Okay, so what's happening in these pictures? What's happening in these pictures? We'll say to the children, tell us what's happening in these pictures. So the top picture, the bear is up the tree, leaning out, trying to get the sandwiches. We can see now that it's sandwiches that smell very nice. And in the bottom picture, whoops, the bear has fallen out of the tree. So what can we imply about what happens to the bear from those pictures? What can we infer about the bear? What happens to the bear? What's he like? What do we know about the bear's life? Anybody got any ideas? We're just looking at the pictures. The bear's naughty. What else? Bear's fallen out of a tree. Is he a lucky bear? Do good things happen to him? He's clumsy. Absolutely. Bad things happen to the bear. Unfortunate things happen to the bear. He's not a very lucky bear. So we're just doing all of this by looking at the pictures and asking children questions. What do they think is happening? So this is what happens next. The hiker goes behind a waterfall. And the kind of comprehension question a student might get would be, what happens next? What do you think happens next? Based on everything we've seen in the picture, what do we think happens next? Anybody got any ideas? The bear follows and gets wet. Absolutely. That's exactly what happens next. But we've built up that bit of reading for implied meaning and inference by simply looking at pictures and asking the student judicious guided questions about what's going on in the illustrations. So it's perfectly possible to start to build some of these reading for inference skills, doing picture reading with children in stages 1, 2, and 3. Great, thank you.